Good afternoon. It's Ross Finlayson again. Sunday, March 17th, 2023. Or, excuse me, December 17th, 2023. Not quite sure where I came up with Mars instead of December, but it's been a long year. So, today, what I figured to do is continue with where I just left off, which is talking about the differential systems and the notion that effectively for the concepts of what are called energeia, the energy of things as kind of the content and after mass energy equivalency in space-time, and the dunamis, or the potentiality of things. That in our theory, when we talk about what's real, and is generally considered what's the classical and the linear, that really what we have in our theory is also what's called a theory of the potentials, the sum potentials of things, and the omega potentials, the totality of the potentials, that then affect that according to our principles of least action and after causality, that it's really these fields as of one continuous manifold of space-time that's all one thing, a whole. And then for its parts, and the entelechy of where it has kind of its parts that have their end as a whole, that this energeia and dunamis and entelechy are the same sorts of concepts, classically as of the antiquarians or canon, as what are today are called the notions of potential theory, as arises for kinetic energies is known as potential kinetic energy. In any situation where there's identified for a system of equations a balance of things that sums to zero. And so whatever is written as the quantities of the events and actions and motions and their exchanges and interchanges everything has its equal and opposite part that's left over, the potential. So the potential energy and the kinetic energy sum out. And then the idea for this theory of sum potentials, theory of omega potentials, is that then it's really that kind of outside of things that's the whole framework of the setup. That from our mesoscale in the middle, that we arrive at what is just in happenstance manner, why inverse square explains gravitation, why inverse cubes represents power to weight ratio, and otherwise these usual notions or concepts of the static and dynamic of mechanics is kind of like so. And as it has been being discussed here, why momentum, which was used to be considered among the conserved quantities, is really a sort of pseudo-momentum. And then we talk about this centripetal and centrifugal, as of about the petals and the fugue or the fugue, and when in our model we have one or the other, that there's really a true centrifugal, and that gets in the definitions of things, why according to perspective and projection, that they're both so, but then finally in the final sort of theory you have to have that it's the outer side or the potentials. So that's in the kinematics, or for the first general parts of physics, that is got the thermodynamic as kinetic energy, and mass energy equivalence is relating to kinetic energy for a given mass's content as energy kinetically. Then there's kinetics and kinematics, that you think of kinetics as just kind of like a line or a vector, and the kinematics is all the multipole moments of anything that's an organization of systems that move together and also end up influence each other to make rotation. So that's kinetics and kinematics. So then there's the electromechanical is related to that. So electromotive force is also called potential difference, is also called voltage. In our fluid model of electricity, which operates kind of like the hydraulic model of water, a fluid model of fluids, of liquids, and that electricity is kind of the opposite of that, as has been discussed in some senses, like current and response and this kind of thing. And that electrons flow almost as fast as the speed of light, a couple orders of magnitude less, but that just reflects that the state of the electromagnetic fields are like so. And if there's one thing that's good about the electromagnetic fields, and we talk about them today, is that we get taught about B and D and E, the electric and magnetic fields that are the classical ones, but there already are a bunch of lettered potential fields that actually more fully define all the things and help explain remnants and the notions of that as a wave and a standing wave, that the resonance theory really makes for that the electro mechanical is one interface of the things where the energy exchanges. Energy is always conserved, but really it's just a balance either side with a zero in the middle called a continuum, if not a conservation law, which it is, if not just a symmetry, which it is about an invariant, which it is. So that's just to relate that the theory of some potentials is the same thing for both systems of mass as a quantity and systems of charge as a quantity. And about the whole milieu of the electron physics and the quantization of that vis-a-vis the entire milieu of the kinetic and the Galilean, what became the Lorentzian, which is as of the Newtonian, which is for Einstein, that he spent a lot of time in his career trying to figure out how to approach that with regards to the singularities and this kind of thing. Then there's light. And as a complement to light, if you kind of think of mass and charge as these complements, and then there's light and the radionuclear, which is usually finally is that in the radionuclear, it's usually that the half-lives of isotopes of elements is very, very long. The terrene iron is not going to transmute atomically till such a long time that's outside the range of the bounds experiment. That light optically really reflects kind of an exchange as with it that's so fast and fleeting. Light is always fleeting, flux and gone, vis-a-vis that there's the interface of the electrical and the kinematic, and that radio waves see that actions in a radio wave propagate at near light speed. Then we have the light speed in the center kind of a thing as just kind of a way to help arrange the running constants, this a stack, this tree posts of these things, which helps explain why that a theory of potentials enables one to have that all kind of together in one theory. So one reason that then the differential systems and the differential analysis, dynamical modeling, and then getting into its deconstructive accounts, like the pseudo differential and this and that. Here's just mentioned the pseudo momentum in that, is to help rebuild these models that would break down, and that science is missing a really large part in the middle between quantum mechanics, general relativity, or actions of the very small and actions according to gravity, bodies in the very large. That gravity somehow still has to arrive from that, and is this potential gravity, some kind of fall gravity, principle of least action, yet it still arises. These are the kinds of notions that help for theoreticians, theoretical physicists, where all of mathematics and logic are theories, to help them get put together. So that's just a kind of an introduction to what is a milieu of a practicing theoretical physicist these days, who already kind of has been able to gain all the benefits of all the experiences, wisdom, knowledge, and learning of the objects of our canon and the people of our canon. And that as well, we have all these different stepping off points in the development of the science. So whenever it results that something has to be revisited and rethought, somebody already did. And then in those ways, we're just kind of left out as trails. So there's, like for the fall gravity, there's Fadio and Lesage. For putting length and contraction and time dilation together, there's Fitzgerald with Einstein and Lorentz. For Newton, there's Einstein, whose next goal, as he put it out of my later years, is these zeroth laws and the classical action of mechanics. So that's good. So I went and found another necktie for my loose assemblage of neckties, and I have a couple irons and ironing boards. They don't see much use really, but it's just one of those things. and now then I'll just get back and kind of opportunistically start grabbing from the stack of books and see what we might so arise at for just kind of an assortment or inspiration as from that, as things come together, like in the notions of David Bohm and the quantum consciousness or whatever, a combined consciousness, that it's kind of like when you listen to the radio and the lyrics start making sense, that's an attachment, these kinds of things. Comprehensive Chess Openings, Volume 3, Closed Games. So what you got in the chess openings is open games, closed games, and semi-open games. And so game theory is basically a notion of some kind of, usually the notion that you'd have players of a game and that they would be assigned randomly any of a given set of initial arrangements as what present the openings of the games. And then that according to some random, equal, fair coin toss or otherwise chance that they start on the same terms or in regards to one or the other having advantage, then it's as well exchange the other side in terms of fair games. And is chess a fair game? Well, not necessarily so, because white has the first move, and then there's also that the asymmetry of the board has the king and queen are on opposite sides and either side. But what these are then is in the study of the games of chess, which is just an 8x8 square and pieces that have so their moves. There's also sorts gambits, which are risks, and openings, which establish positions. That generally the idea is pieces on the board and a control of the center, and protection of the stronger pieces and establishment of the positions of the pawns. So anyways, that's I don't really have too much of a study of the Molar defense or knight to king pawn or the Steinitz defense deferred or these kinds of things. But these books have a lot going on, and they explain in the little language of the moves of chess all these kinds of things, like the main variation of the Ruy Lopez. Ruy Lopez is really famous. But Panov and Zagorowski is a little bit less well known. The chess players, though, are so familiar with the context and the surrounds and the history of the game, though, that is very much usually assigned. The important time when these games came out in the context of a contest or a tournament. That it's a competitive game and it's considered fair and so it has to be prevented against dishonesty or cheating and this kind of thing. And it generally is by not allowing people to consult outside resources that the chess player is a given player, abstractly. That these are the sorts of books that help explain, in terms of the dynamics and the derivations, what became for the openings, then the mid game, and the end game. That this is basically for any kind of strategy game, like any kind of a turn-based strategy game that involves a setting of the development of men or the pieces. That then the notions of the openings establish very initial conditions are going to lead to cascades or to blockades or otherwise. What gets into the mid game, where the mid game is what sees the major developments and the give and take and what will happen then later, and then the end game, and as with regards to usually the end game is all drawn out. The end game is either a pretty direct fait accompli, or it really results that then it's set into the end game and the long drawn out end game. It's kind of like they say sometimes there are some games you have to pay to play. There are other games where you have to stay to play. So anyways, that's just kind of a study of, the study of this game. Logical chess, move by move. The only chess book that explains every move of the game. Well, I don't know about that. I mean, the usual idea is you want to develop pieces and get as many pieces on the board as possible. So in a usual strategy game, that's like a computer game, where something like Civilization 6 has got a 500 by 500 board and 10 or 20 players at a time. The idea is to develop initially as many moving pieces and development regions as possible, because over time they add up, vis-a-vis what is necessary to just build up a sufficient position to then be able to make a significant play, which affects the balance of the thing. So it's a balance to try to figure these things out. I've gotten very good at some of them. And so when it got to the point where I would play a computer chess game and I most immediately lose to any reasonably good program set up for chess. At the same time, I do find that I play with fair rules and on hard or very difficult, and it's possible to win these games. First, from knowing the rules. And knowing that the rules are equal for everybody who plays, and if they're not, then you haven't established that, there's kneecapping. There's handicapping as a way to make games fair, and kneecapping is a way to make games not fair. So try to avoid that by any means. And that in terms of a game like cards or chess, you can trust what you can see above the table, because anything else could be fixed. So it's not to be treated for any purposes of what's the matter of the wager, because that's for entertainment purposes only, otherwise, and it's be protected. So anyways, haven't really read these, and there's not too much time to really get into the full culture of something like that. But it's kind of good to know these things with regards to tactics and strategy, these being the basic concepts from wargaming, which is the notions of the theory of tactics, which are small unit operations, and strategy, which is the long game encompassing through the end game, while the tactics generally reflect the same notion in their context. So, here's a manual of Zen Buddhism. So manual of Zen Buddhism, as we talked about last time, you can't learn Zen, is what I was told. And so I don't know if that's true, because it basically then gets into the notions that you have to experience it. But there are canonical Zen koans. The koan is what's called the Zen thought experiment or puzzle. And sometimes they're meant to be funny, and sometimes they're not. And it's with regards to something like the thundering silence of Vimalakirti, undefiled fame. When he is indisposed, the Buddha wants to send some of his disciples to inquire after him, but no one is forthcoming. When the Buddha asks for the explanation, they have one excuse after another. The main reason is that none of his disciples are equal in understanding of Buddhism to this householder philosopher. Finally, Mahayana Buddhism. And so about the Buddhism is that Mahayana Buddhism is about along the same lines as Kant and Hegel, and also the dialectic of like the Dzogchen and that. So the Eastern and Western concepts are much same. So let's see. Grigg's Philosophical Classics. Let's see what it says. Grigg's Philosophical Classics is by Hegel's Logic. He's German Philosophical Classics for English readers and students. So when I got this book, I've been collecting about Hegel. And so it's dedicated to Brockmeyer, about 1883 from 1860. So this was near and now in the time of the dialectic thread of the external reflections and the assignment to Hegel of the priority of his representation of the school, what is the assignment of to a person or to a school or an organization, what is a concept that otherwise is immanent in itself. So This is, of course, a defect only of the exposition and not of the underlying insight of Hegel himself. We lionize these people, and then we kind of only take from them what we still consider as good. The rest is put aside as apologetics for the time and place and the lens as we view them, vis-a-vis that these enduring fundamental concepts are so important and valid. And as for being in itself, return into self, shine, a sense of reflection. Phenomenon is three subdivisions: the categorization, organization of things, the structure of these things. You got the actuality as a Wirklichkeit. And so the German language has its nouns are mostly compound words, or as it seems to be, where in English we'll have short phrases and words for things. And then as from the Greek and so on, that they have words for things. Of course, it's all built upon etymology. And then the German words that aren't loan words, a lot of them are built from the word shots or the vocabulary, that their dictionary is of sort, a lot of times, compound words. And so that is just something that is pretty regular in terms of like an encyclopedia of these things. This view is substantially retained in the encyclopedia, except that it is presented as the first subheading under phenomenon. Phenomenal and supersensuous worlds. Supersensuous, not all sensuous, just above sensuous. When taken as a complete or absolute thought, is found to be returned to self. So this just gets into all kinds of paeans and placebos and platitudes also, that when people are seeking meaning from philosophy and technically, that they can find that. Hegel therefore considers himself to have arrived by the dialectic of subjectivity at objectivity. Indeed. And vice versa. In other words, he sees that an adequate conception of the Begriff or self-activity brings us to understand how the totality of the subject must be also the totality as object. I'm sure right now. Hegel's Syllogism and Psychology. Hegel has not indicated the psychological application of his doctrine of the figures, but his discussion suggests it. Theory of mind is a very strong affirmation of one's own conscious. Well, so anyways, you can find many, many books. This one from 150 years ago, the one we were just looking at the other day, from just a few years ago, and because they're referring to the same silver thread, the same enduring concepts, the same theory, which can be so self-contained so briefly, but it's still subjective and objective for everybody else. The subjectivity and objectivity represent a major distinction in reference vis-a-vis something that's personal and something that's shared, interpersonally, vis-a-vis something that's impersonal yet still collective. We think, vis-a-vis like we think, or vice versa. And so the objectivity and subjectivity are important aspects of criticality and if not necessarily skepticism, but the criticality of the views of things and the ability to consider them apace with each other or apart. So, yeah, that's a neat little book. Let's see here. Greek Science, the Pelican Book, $1.45. Atoms of Democritus. So here, as we started this talk, it was about the Energeia and the dunamis, the potential, and it's for the principle of least action, simpliciter and that kind of stuff. And so here, this fellow, he makes a survey of Greek science. So we'll consult the index of his book and see what he might have to say about potential. It does not have an entry for that word, but then as with regards to, and you'll find in the study of the Greeks that there's various transliterations and spellings. like Heraclitus or Heraclides or Democritus or Democrates, or Aristotle and Aristoteles, and these kinds of things. And in some respects, that reflects just the changing transliterations over time that are in effect. And the other ones, it also sometimes reflects that they're the same people with different names, or they're different people with the same names. So it's quite a rich field. Energeia, one of the first scientists, I suppose. Page 77. Greek medicine, the theory of humors, much similar to traditional Chinese medicine. Theory of humors, qi, lymph, so, and exercise, and the notions of, use it or lose it, and these kinds of things. So history is kind of combined, and then as well these important concepts come down so that we have a common canon, and it's global these days. It's changed a lot, not at all, by the information age. Though some people are very unfamiliar with it, which is, what they'll find though when they look for it is the same. So that's good. Gottlob Frege, The Foundations of Arithmetic. So Gottlob Frege is this great guy, and he was a number theorist, and so he invented, before Russell and Whitehead invented the Principia Mathematica, Frege had his Begriffsschrift, which was related, a work, a Begriff, a Beweis, and a Begriff, and essays, and these kinds of things. But anyway, his theory came up with a theory for arithmetic and the numbers, and it's basically just arithmetical, and he really just kind of collects most of the laws about the usual counting numbers and these and that. And it was kind of supplanted, if not usurped, by Russell, and then after that by the declaration of, after Zermelo-Fraenkel's set theory and von Neumann's theory of ordinals, and then how arithmetic can arrive at that, and Giuseppe Peano's theories of the numbers, that we have all our 1 + 1 = 2 as from this deep foundation of the things. That Gottlob Frege's works were an attempt to implement a foundation of numbers. And so he really did a great job. And then only when he got to the limits of logical quantification with regards to the finding of the uncovering, or the aletheia, as it would be, the discovering of the logical paradoxes, or as they're not, just the logical thought experiments that require resolution, that Frege kind of threw in the towel after Russell kind of submarined him with the Russell paradox. But at the same time, you can take the finite numbers of what remains is of just regular finite numbers and apply Russell's same reasoning to itself. It's defined away is that we have an inductive set and it's well-founded. It's a stipulation, and it's useful to help provide a closure for some things, and to enable a whole raft of results after the uncountable, and to build an inequality, to then build a system of inequalities for the real numbers, and all these things that then work up why we define least upper bound. It's a property of numbers that it doesn't fall out of the set when it's just incrementally different. And then we define this measure 1.0. But otherwise, the theory can come up with that from continuous domains without that. But as a linear development and curriculum, it's still what it is. It's still good. It's just not the end all be all, indeed. And so Frege was not a hypocrite. And his theory for anything that's the completion of arithmetic is sound and can be found in Gottlob Frege. In the Grundlagen. When we read Frege's Grundlagen with its carefully explicated logicist analysis of the concept of number, we are considering a chapter in a much longer and more detailed story that ultimately involved a theoretical tragedy. None of these facts, as important they are to bear in mind as we study Frege's 1884 work on the concept of number, prevent him from being recognized as having inaugurated an important new method for the analysis of concepts with far-reaching implications and a new way of doing philosophy. He triumphs in spite of the failure of what he considered to be the main contribution of his mathematical philosophy. Russell's appreciation for Frege's Grundlagen analysis of the concept of natural number is reflected in his book, Introduction to Mathematical Philosophy, written in prison during World War I when Russell was a conscientious objector to the war. There in Chapter 2, the definition of number, Russell writes, the question, what is a number, is one which has been often asked, but has only been correctly answered in our own time. Well, I'll just leave it at that. It's something that he found a step up and then prioritized that as the last word. His synthesis, antithesis, or thesis, antithesis, and synthesis is that he developed to create an antithesis to what was the existing thesis. This is Hegel's dialectic. From the thesis, he found something wrong with it, and so he brought it into the realm of the antithesis, and they built a synthesis above that to keep it together. But as you can see, there's kind of a missing link there from that to and now we have this dialectic of the things. It's just like he performed an act, not detailing what it was. So, but Frege is very famous, and then if there's a factoid about Bertrand Russell, is that he was a well-known conscientious objector to war, and then also in the nuclear age, in the time when the bomb became a thing, that the peace sign of the 60s, which is kind of like a circle with a line vertically down through it, and then two legs is from the center, is actually two letters, N for nuclear and D disarmament, as would be semaphores or in the coding of the language of those things. It's ND for nuclear disarmament is the well-known peace sign, which that also has various meanings. And in some cultures, you have to be careful because pretty much any kind of gesture or gesticulation in one culture, whether it's good or bad or forward or backward or anything like that, there's at least one other culture where it's considered offensive. So, like the peace sign forward and backward or something like that. Long story short, the Grundlagen is a great reference work and builds a concept of numbers. The number one is a thing. One is the loneliest number. Yet in the classes of all the equivalence classes of numbers that are the cardinal numbers, according to set theory, and then I have all these sets, then we have equivalence classes, which are a little bit too large to be sets, but that's still what we call them. Because number theory and set theory are two different theories. They have two different elementary objects, but we frame it all in set theory because it's fundamentally only has one relation to cope with. And then the descriptive, we build models, structures that represent all the theorems and aspects of other types of objects like numbers, and then just say that then it's descriptive set theory. Set theory by itself doesn't have much to say. Descriptive set theory is the application attachment of all the models of all the theories to structures that we can build and show have structurally results in the theory. So one is well known as from 0 to 1, not including 0, it's the smallest number. But as a class of things that are singletons in the universe, it's the largest equivalence class. That gets all the way up to what's called Kunin inconsistency, which is that what's that in the context of the universe minus it? What's the thing? And ordinary set theory does not have a universe in it, but we talk about naive set theory and theories with universes. Logic has covered this quite a bit, and really, I've that's really what I've been studying for a long time. So, I think it's interesting, and I've also felt like I've been able to gain a grounds and understanding that what's naive is true again. When you say naive, the naive is missing some context. They don't know. But at the same time, it's like I'm naive of an opinion that's outside of my intuition, which I feel is true. The intuition is true in the sense that it's unsurprising, or that that it fulfills general expectations. And then the intuition and construction, intuitionism and constructivism, are basically reflected as flip sides of a coin, that every few generations flip sides. What was intuitionistic then is constructivist again, and vice versa. And so generally what you find in the field is what's nascent and growing in the field is called the intuitionist, because it's kind of growing. And what's constructivist is what's already established. And so this is, again, the thesis, antithesis, the synthesis with so results. So that's a nice brief thesis and antithesis and synthesis of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. This was presented, of course, as in our usual discourse in school about how to make an expository essay, that is the form of its structure. To make an expository account of an opinion, or a reasoning to make an opinion, an argument, for argument's sake, not necessarily full rhetoric's sake, where rhetoric includes any artifices or artifacts of the communicative vis-a-vis that which leads to inference reasoning or the lack thereof in the adaptation of an opinion or belief. In order now to dispel this delusion that with respect to the positive whole numbers no difficulties actually obtained at all, but rather universal agreement reigns, it appears worthwhile to me to criticize some of the opinions of philosophers and mathematicians concerning the questions that come into consideration here. One will see how little harmony there is here, so that contradictory remarks are immediately to be found. Well, this just gets into to varied purposes, varied reasons why numbers are as they are. Then whether or not there really exists an infinity after all, there does. And whether or not it's of any particular form, it isn't. And then as with regards to, it's like, at least there's enough. There's always enough. And if there's sometimes too many, there's at least enough. So, this is a pretty cool little book, and it's as after Gottlob Frege. It's a translation of him, by Dale Jacquet. Translated with an introduction and critical commentary. So yeah, Gottlob Frege is to be well known as one of our lions and poster boys of the summation of the 19th century as the candidate and foundations. So, a book on Wittgenstein, A.C. Grayling's Wittgenstein, published in 1988. To arrive at a main outline of Wittgenstein's thought. An attempt to summarize Wittgenstein's work would be neither successful nor useful. That's not his goal. His goal is to provide a panoply of rejection for free thinkers, essentially. Now, of course, the author, as the author puts it, I am not convinced by these points that Wittgenstein is not summarizable. Wittgenstein's writings seem to me not only summarizable, but in positive need of summary, especially now that they run to a large number of posthumously published volumes containing much overlap and repetition. Nor is it true that Wittgenstein's writings contain no systematically expressible theories, for indeed they do. There's a difference between what Wittgenstein says and the way he says it, which is relevant here. And that gets into our whole notions of the literary criticism, the deconstructive accounts, the reception of the text, the intended and received reception of the text, these kinds of things. The wide latitude for competing interpretations of Wittgenstein nevertheless creates problems. Yeah, it's not meant to be accepted as dogma, or it's expected to be, read as Wittgenstein and his peers. Introductory books should encourage their readers to investigate at first hand the subjects with which they deal. In some cases, however, it is simply too ambitious to expect non-specialist readers to do this without first acquiring a substantial minimum of background knowledge. So, when you hear about Wittgenstein, what you want to look into is the Tractatus. It's like an essay, but like a kind of worked up, tracted, development, an essay. Philosophicus, where he sets forth his theory of mind, where he has an objective and an objectivity, in the senses of the words. Oh, now this is a treatise concerning the principles of human knowledge by George Berkeley, edited with an introduction by Colin M. Turbane. So I don't not know so much about Berkeley. Copyright 1957. The vulgar view then and now is of an eccentric, befooled enthusiast who produced an equally impractical philosophy. As a philosopher, he was antagonistic to the intellectual tone of his age. He opposed Newton's metaphysics, philosophy of science, much of his optics, and some of his mathematics, and admitted that much of Newton was so directly opposite to his own doctrine. So you might think of Berkeley, who is most famous for saying that the mathematical infinitesimals are as ghosts of departed quantities, that they are phantasmal and phantasmagorical in a sense. So, but at the same time, he's a satirist. So in the milieu where he was, he couldn't write and talk about these things without staying dogmatic in terms of the clergy and in terms of, the Church of England or wherever it was he was. So a lot of the things he phrases, kind of like, and sometimes in the Islamic Golden Age and stuff like that, you'll find what they'll do is they'll put the words of alternative opinions in their enemies, but then still fully spout them out. So if you've never read George Berkeley's paper after Newton's development of fluxions, which are like the infinitesimals that add up an infinity of them to one, exactly, that it's actually quite interesting development of the theory in place. And then he just poo-poos it, and then he could send that to all of his readers, and they could have it without it being bad for them. Trinity College, Dublin, 1685 to 1753. And so he talks about Newton and Leibniz's developments. Leibniz says of Berkeley, "I suspect that the man in Ireland is one of those people who seek to become famous by their paradoxes." Well, I see him as kind of a satirist, and at the same time, though, a kind of with some cards up his sleeve, or whatever, as it were, with regards to being kind of a closeted satirist who, at the same time, was exploring the concepts of these philosophies and the developments that would make it so that you could arrive at learning in these things, was also keeping the exact sort of same tone for an opposite audience of these things. Oh, we talk about theory, logicism, and all this kinds of stuff. So he precedes this the skepticism, which is a form of intuitionism and belief. He precedes that of the later development in Victorian England by quite a ways. So as like an Ambrose Pierce or Oscar Wilde or something like that, George Berkeley, kind of like that. Karl Jasper's Truth and Symbol. Truth and symbol. Truth and symbol. So what I would suggest is that I don't have much to read from Jaspers. And similarly, I don't have much to read from Kierkegaard, because logical positivism already has its own kind of impetus and momentum. And I don't need somebody to tell me about, like, to combine theories of reasoning with, like, theories of the proletariat or Marxism or this or that, which are matters of questions of common causes and the utilitarian and the pragmatic and the goals of utopia, where everything is just great, and the notions of progress in the social, where progress means change, but I don't necessarily think it's a good thing. Since Descartes, the subject-object dichotomy in consciousness has been one of the central problems of philosophy, perhaps the central problem. So it goes both ways, objectivity and subjectivity. It's subjective and subjective with respect to each other. Having a strong belief in oneself and knowing there's just some logical preliminaries that provide one with one's own both constructive canon and intuitionistic identity makes it so that a reflective sort of dialectic account on object-subject distinction has them separate both ways. So. Karl Jasper's interpretation of this problem arises from the failure of German idealism, both subjective and objective, to overcome the dichotomy which arises from Kant's distinction between the reflective and determinate judgments. So here, this is an effort. So I already have one, but if I needed one, I might be able to find something from Jasper's. I already have one. So, and you can largely, this is what we call the apologetics. We can largely also get it from the original sources, and so via the lens and this and that, that one of the reasons that Kant and Hegel are still held up is because they also deftly kept their concerted opinion about the real feelings and development for it in the texts, not necessarily as the blaring headline, but the fine print and their summary, and logically as you follow them, where the river flows, this kind of thing. The undermining of the rational cosmological solutions of Hegel and Schelling and the attack upon positivism by Kierkegaard and Nietzsche prepared the way for the emergence of a new interpretation of the subject-object dichotomy. This was much already explored by the later Schelling in his Munich and Berlin lecture. Schelling's positive philosophy, contrast to his early objective idealism, emphasized the existential rather than the essential rational character of the subject in thought. So he's selling empirical pragmatism to people, which a lot of people eat right up. That it speaks directly to their material interests, which everybody has, and first satisfying some material interest is necessary for otherwise being subject to that. He disclosed the impossibility of overcoming the historical and unique concreteness of the existing subject in a movement of thought which makes of the subject a mere moment in the dialectic of reason. And then, so he's one of these anti-positivists, which don't go back the other way. They just kind of go further afield, and it's like, we don't know, and we don't know, but you can't tell us so either, which is fine. I mean, as a reason to justify their own kinds of opinions on things, but it's not necessary. I don't really find. But it's good to know these kinds of things because in the context of the thought and over time, it's one other thing. The question is, how far can a body be ruined by unreasonable knowledge on the part of the soul? And secondly, how far is the management of physical life able to enhance the soul? And finally, how far can even a failing body be yet sustained by a reasonable soul? Well, these are pretty material questions about his soul. Logic and language. This is great. This was written about 1948, 1945. So, and what it does is explains, first of all, how words are formed according to, from the neck up kind of a thing, and phonetically. And then it gets into a very good description of a practical logic. So this is not classical logic. This is commonsensical, very. And so if you want a book that's just like great, easy reading for a common sense logical development of things, and that kind of speaks for some people in what's a really reasonable and easily understood tone, that Huppe and Comiskey have this great book called Logic and Language. Yes, much truer, he said. So it gets into, he talks about the myth of the cave. And so this is one of these great thought experiments. And so he does address kind of the canonist stuff. I mean, it's not separated as just one of these, newfangled 50s and 60s, systems-based, then into the cybernetic, after operations research, when scientism became so successful, or what was that, McNamara's Folly or whatever, is like, well, they told me so on the board, I thought it would be right. Numbers never lie, It's not like that. They still reflect on the canon and our context. But it's really great that they, in terms of specifically in American English, they have quite a bit going on with linguistics and the representation of tone and concepts and these kinds of things. Oh, as time flies, huh? Tempus fugit. Philosophy of Mathematics. This is Benacerraf and Putnam. So Hilary Putnam and Paul Benacerraf are pretty important from the 80s and 90s in the academic treatment of formal methods and formal ontologies and such manners of mathematics as it's known. And after a pretty naive interpretation of axiomatic set theory and this kind of thing. So I don't hold too much to them. I don't really point to Benacerraf and Putnam as telling me anything. But they have a bunch of great things that are usually well held. So this is just a collection of, let's see, Carnap, Hayting, Heyting, von Neumann, Hayting, Brouwer. So Brouwer is held up as one of the intuitionists. So this has got some great stuff in it. And Brouwer, and then Dummett. Michael Dummett has a lot going on, but it doesn't result much. Frege and Russell, Hilbert, Curry. Curry has got some great stuff in it. Kreisel. I just really lean on. I don't really lean on Kreisel, I guess. Carnap is known for some pretty good things. Oh, he's got something from Poincaré on the nature of mathematical reasoning. So out of this, then we get into something like Terry Tao's, or Dr. Terence Tao's, the Fields medalists, hard and soft reasoning, intuitionistic and constructivist reasoning, mathematical reasoning. That otherwise, this is quite staid and usually the conservative, not saying much more. If the conservative and progressive are so different, they're not. In the terms of the polemical, but in terms of when theory and the dogma is just being stood up and being able to say that this is a tome that's largely indisputable, it kind of goes without saying. It's a collection. So. Alfred Tarski's Logic, Semantics, and Metamathematics. Tarski is great. So if you've heard of Kurt Gödel, you should know about Alfred Tarski. They address much the same content. Tarski is a bit more rich in the analytical, vis-a-vis Gödel's kind of like overtopping developments of completeness, incompleteness, and da-da-da. And so Tarski is when you talk about truth in a theory, it's like only what's true in a theory. So you can have two theories and they have totally different opinions about things, but you still have what's true according to one theory and what's true in another theory, or each true in their theories. It's called Tarski truth. Compared to like universal truth, no. Universal truth vis-a-vis any given theory's truth. Like the idea that there's a concept in physics called multiple worlds, so parallel universes. So anything that can happen according to matters of chance, circumstance, or uncertainty, they kind of exist in these other universes. Well, no, they don't. But according to theory, there's a theory where they do. And so then the idea is that according to Tarski truth, one can explore alternatives, contingencies, temporal modalities of all sorts freely, in theory, without worrying and getting into too much otherwise these paradoxes and contradictions, and by no means forestalling free will at all, except insofar as that there are the deterministic forces in effect, and via least action they will so carry. Things do go in time, and it's where the river flows and this kind of stuff. But objective thinkers are agents and actors, and can choose their own destinies in a sense, or at least dream, and that kind of thing. So, anyways, Tarski though is a very good formalist. He says on the limitations of the means of expression of deductive theories. So, and then he talks about here that's the inductive impasse either way. So that's where the limits are in some of these deductive theories, because usually he's talking about like in an inductive theory already, it's well founded. Then the deductions that arrive in that, like all methods, such methods of elimination, of mutual contradictions, or things which would not jibe, or these kinds of uses of deduction in induction, that helps build up inductive inference and deductive inference alongside each other, within each other, all as part of inference, whether it's a closed box or it's open. This is the kind of thing that he gets into. Tarski is one of the 2 or 3 seminal figures in logic and the foundations of mathematics in the 20th century. I can think of no better publishing project in the general area of logic and the foundations of mathematics than the republication of the appropriate corrections under Tarski's supervision of this classic volume by Patrick Supps, S-U-P-P-E-S, Supps, Lucy Stern, Professor of Philosophy, Stanford University. It contains the only complete English translation of the concept of truth in formalized languages. So foundations then builds up our axiomatics and our methods for model theory and proof theory, which are equi-interpretable, differential analysis, and all that stuff. Well, according to the clock, time has flown. So I guess I'll continue this a little bit more later. That it's just a chance to look through some of the stacks here. I quite generally refrain from offering my fuller opinion on these things sometimes, but it really is something that overall I found that having kind of a concerted opinion collected from all the canons and the dogmas and together kind of the thinking has that it wholly relates that largely that takes the burden of the ontological commitment to these things and assigns it to then all what follows is these usual correspondence theory of truth, pragmatic theory of truth, coherent theory of truth, as via what other people think, to then have an idea how it could be possible that someone else thinks exactly the same themselves. All right. Well, have a great day. I hope this is another good installment. And what I'll try to figure out next time, as I still have quite a variety of the loose assemblage of neckties to go through. We'll probably be just either digging a little bit more through the stack. The library is just a volume full of stacks of the books, the whole library, much of which will never go read, much of which will not need be referenced to, but that it still is our canon, the stacks. Hey, so long.